I woke up in a hospital bed after a stroke, my left arm almost useless. In a few hours, my son was supposed to get married in Paris. I expected him to ask if I was okay. Instead, my daughter-in-law burst in and shouted, "Couldn't you have picked another day to nearly die?" My son glared at me and snapped, "Do you know what your little emergency just cost me?" I said nothing. I waited until they walked out, picked up my phone, and made one call. 4 days later, they were begging to see me. Before we go further, I am genuinely grateful you are here with me today. Drop a comment and tell me what city or country are you watching from. I read every single one. A quick note: this story contains fictional elements crafted for reflection and entertainment. Any resemblance to names or places is coincidental, but the lesson it carries is worth keeping. The smell hit me first, and that sharp chemical bite of antiseptic that gets into the back of your throat and stays there. I have always hated that smell. 45 years of running Callaway Auto Repair. The worst thing my shop ever smelled like was motor oil and burned rubber. At least those were honest smells. Smells that meant something had been fixed. I blinked against the fluorescent lights overhead, white and merciless, the kind that make every person in the room look like they are already halfway to a funeral. The steady beeping of the heart monitor beside me was the only sound keeping me tethered to the present. I tried to lift my left arm and felt nothing, not pain, not tingling, just a heavy, unresponsive silence where my arm used to be. My right hand found the IV line taped to my wrist. I followed it upward with my eyes to the bag hanging above me, dripping clear fluid, slow and steady. I was alive. That was something. I lay there, in that narrow hospital bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles, and I thought about Brandon, my son. 36 years old, sharp dresser, good smile, the kind of smile that opens doors before you even knock. I had been the one to teach him that smile back when he was a gangly 12-year-old who used to stand in front of the bathroom mirror practicing. I had worked double shifts for 12 years straight to put him through college, to give him a life that looked nothing like mine, grease under the fingernails, boots worn through at the toe, a lunch that was usually whatever I had left over from the night before. He was in Nashville now, but he would be on his way here. He would have gotten the call from the hospital. He would be in the car already, probably speeding, probably scared half to death. I closed my eyes and let myself believe that for a minute. Then the door swung open, not gently, not the careful push of someone stepping into a sick room. It was thrown open the way you throw open a door when you are late and furious and the world is not moving fast enough for you. The hinges let out a crack that made the heart monitor spike. Brandon walked in first, navy suit, perfectly pressed hair, slicked back, jaw tight. Behind him came Cassandra Whitmore, the woman he was supposed to marry in Paris. In a few hours, the woman I had spent $180,000 to give a wedding worthy of a magazine spread. She was carrying a Hermes bag I recognized because I had seen the credit card receipt. Her eyes swept the room once, took in the IV, the monitor, the cast immobilizing my left arm, and dismissed all of it. There were no tears. There was no relief. There was no, "Oh, thank God, Dad, you are alive." Brandon stopped at the foot of my bed and looked at me the way a man looks at a traffic jam, something that has no right to be in his way. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" he said. My mouth opened and then closed. I genuinely did not know what to say to that. Cassie stepped forward, heels clicking against the linoleum, and crossed her arms. "We have a flight to Paris in 4 hours, Walt." She never called me Dad. Not once in 3 years. "The villa deposit is non-refundable. Do you understand that? Non-refundable." "I had a stroke," I said. My voice came out rougher than I expected, like gravel being dragged across pavement. "A minor stroke." Brandon said, his voice clipped. He was already pulling out his phone, checking something already mentally somewhere over the Atlantic. "The doctor said you are stable." You are not dying. Cassie turned to Brandon, not even bothering to lower her voice. He couldn't have picked literally any other day to do this. Something moved through my chest that had nothing to do with the fractured blood vessel in my brain. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time in 36 years, I did not recognize the man standing at the foot of my bed. The boy I had raised knew how to shake a stranger's hand and look them in the eye. The boy I had raised had cried at his mother's funeral until his whole body shook. The boy I had raised used to fall asleep in the passenger seat on the drive home from Little League, trusting completely that I would get him where he needed to go. That boy was gone. In his place stood a stranger in an expensive suit checking his watch. "The condo deposit in Paris," Brandon said, finally looking directly at me. "Dad, do you know how much I had to put down on that property, and now because of this?" He gestured at the hospital room with one hand, a short, contemptuous sweep that took in the IV and the monitor, and me along with all of it. Cassie's phone buzzed. She answered it without excusing herself. "Yes, hold on, we are leaving shortly," she said into the receiver, already half-turned toward the door. I felt a slow heat work its way up from somewhere deep, the kind of heat that has nothing to do with temperature. My jaw tightened. My right hand gripped the bed rail. But I kept my voice level because 60 years of living in Memphis had taught me that the man who stays calm in the storm is always the last one standing. "You two go ahead," I said quietly. "Don't miss your flight." Brandon blinked. He had been expecting a fight. I could see it in the set of his shoulders already braced for pushback. My calm threw him off balance for just a second. A flicker of something crossed his face that might have been guilt or might have just been confusion. Then it was gone. "See?" he said to Cassie, already moving toward the door. "He is fine. He said so himself." Cassie did not say goodbye. She did not say, "Feel better," or "I will call you when we land," or anything that a daughter-in-law says to a man lying in a hospital bed. She simply walked out, her heels clicking a sharp, retreating rhythm down the hallway until the sound disappeared entirely. Brandon paused at the doorway. For one moment, one single fragile moment, he turned back and looked at me. And I thought maybe there is something still in there. "Get some rest, Dad," he said. Then he was gone too. The room settled back into its antiseptic quiet. The heart monitor beeped its slow, indifferent rhythm. Through the window, Memphis was waking up, a June sun pressing down on the rooftops, traffic starting to thicken on the boulevard below. A soft knock at the door. Dr. Stephen Mercer stepped in, a trim man in his 50s with silver at his temples and the careful eyes of someone who has spent decades reading people in crisis. He glanced at the empty doorway, then back at me. He had the careful, measured expression of a doctor who had seen something he did not quite know what to do with. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "is there anyone else I can contact for you, family, or—" "No," I said. "There is no one else." He nodded slowly, wrote something on his clipboard. I waited until his footsteps faded down the hall. Then I reached out with my right hand, the one that still worked, and I picked up the cell phone on the bedside table. I scrolled through the contacts. My thumb stopped on a name I had not called in a long time, but a name I had never once deleted. Some calls you make because you are afraid. This one I made because I was ready. The hospital had settled into its mid-morning rhythm by the time I made the call, carts rolling down hallways, the muffled intercom announcing names and room numbers, the particular kind of organized chaos that keeps a building full of broken people running on schedule. I had been lying there for maybe 20 minutes since Brandon and Cassie walked out, turning things over in my mind the way I used to turn over a tricky engine problem. Not panicking, just thinking. When a car comes into the shop making a sound nobody can explain, the worst thing you can do is start pulling parts at random. You listen first. You map the system. You figure out where the noise is actually coming from before you touch anything. Ray Foster picked up on the second ring. Raymond Foster had been my lawyer for 40 years, and my friend for longer than that. He had come to me the first time with a 1987 Buick LeSabre that sounded like it was gargling rocks, and he had left 3 hours later with a fixed transmission and a friendship that had outlasted 2 marriages, his not mine, and more legal battles than I cared to count. Walt. His voice was immediate sharp. I just heard. Are you all right? I am stable, I said. Left arm is not cooperating, but the rest of me works fine. Lord Walt, what do the doctors say about recovery? They say rest and time. I let a beat pass. Ray, I need you to do something for me. Today. Not tomorrow. A brief silence. Ray had known me long enough to hear the difference between a social call and a directive. His voice shifted, the warmth did not leave it, but something else came in underneath something focused and precise. Tell me what you need. I need you to pull every piece of public record tied to Brandon Calloway's name. Business filings, property registrations, anything with the Tennessee Secretary of State. Court records, if there are any. Financial liens. I kept my voice even matter-of-fact, the way I would give a new mechanic a diagnostic checklist. All of it. Start with the business registry. Another pause longer this time. Walt, did something happen? Yes, I said. But I will tell you about that after. Right now, I just need the information. I will start pulling records within the hour, Ray said. And I heard the familiar sound of him reaching for a legal pad, the scratch of his pen. You are sure you want to go down this road? I looked at my left arm lying useless on top of the hospital blanket. I thought about the sound of Cassie's heels clicking out of this room without a backward glance. I thought about Brandon's face in the doorway, that one fragile moment, and what had come after it. I have been sure since about 9 o'clock this morning, I said. Ray let out a slow breath. All right, I will call you tonight. I ended the call and sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. Outside in the hallway, a nurse passed with a cartwheels squeaking against the floor. Somewhere down the ward, a television was playing a morning news program, the anchor's voice rising and falling in that particular rhythmless cadence that all news anchors have. I scrolled to the next name. Michael Schultz had not been in my contact list by accident. 15 years back, I had a boundary dispute with a developer who wanted to build a parking structure on land that had been in my family's name since 1974. The developer had lawyers. I had Ray, and Ray had recommended Schultz, a private investigator out of Nashville, who had relocated to Memphis and built a quiet, serious reputation for finding things that people did not want found. The boundary dispute got resolved in my favor inside of 6 weeks. Schultz had sent me a bill that was fair and a report that was thorough, and I had kept his number ever since, the way you keep a good wrench in the back of a drawer, even if you do not think you will need it again. The phone rang 3 times before he answered. Schultz. Just the one word, flat and professional. Mike, it is Walt Calloway. I need your services. A beat. Mr. Calloway, it has been a while. His voice was measured, careful, the voice of a man who had learned that the less he said, the more useful the information he received. What are you looking for? My son Brandon Calloway. 36, lives in Nashville, works or claims to work in financial consulting. And his fiancée, Cassandra Whitmore. I want to know what they do, where their money comes from, where it goes, who they talk to. I paused. And Mike, her father, Gerald Whitmore. Start with him, too. A brief silence. Can I ask what prompted this? My son walked into my hospital room this morning while I was hooked up to an IV and asked me if I knew what time it was, I said, because he had a flight to catch. Schultz said nothing for a moment. Then I understand. Reporting cycle. Every 48 hours. Encrypted PDF to the email address you have on file. I shifted against the pillow, trying to find a position that did not put pressure on the IV line. One more thing. I am specifically interested in anything Gerald Whitmore has touched in the last 2 to 3 years. Real estate, business filings, professional associations. That is an interesting place to start, Schultz said, and I could hear the faint lift of professional curiosity in his voice. Most clients start with the person they know. I know my son, I said quietly. What I do not know is the man who raised the woman who is about to marry him. And in my experience, if you want to understand a problem, you find the root of it. Schultz gave a low sound of acknowledgement. I will have a preliminary report to you within 48 hours. Thank you, Mike. I set the phone down on the blanket and closed my eyes. Not to sleep was nowhere near me, but to think. The heart monitor beeped its calm mechanical rhythm beside me, and outside the window, Memphis went about its morning. Buses stopping and starting. Church bells somewhere across the city marking 11 o'clock. I had spent a lifetime with my hands in engines. The thing people did not understand about fixing cars, the thing that took most young mechanics years to learn, was that the noise you heard was almost never the actual problem. The squeal from the front wheel was not a wheel problem. It was a brake caliper problem. The engine knock was not an engine problem. It was an oil pressure problem. You had to look past the symptom to find the source. Brandon walking into this room this morning and asking about a flight schedule while his father lay in a hospital bed that told me everything I needed to know about the surface of the problem. What I needed Ray and Schultz to find was everything underneath it. And something in the back of my mind, some instinct that 45 years of watching people walk in and out of my shop had sharpened into something close to radar, told me that when I found the answer, it was going to be a lot bigger than a plane ticket and a non-refundable villa deposit in Paris. I reached over and turned off the television that the morning nurse had switched on for me. I did not need background noise. I needed quiet. There was a lot of work to do. The morning after Brandon and Cassie left for Paris, I woke up before the nurses changed shifts. I could tell by the way the light came through the blinds, thin and pale, still carrying that gray tint of early morning that Memphis gets in mid-June before the heat arrives and turns everything gold. My right hand was steadier than it had been the day before. I flexed it twice, tested each finger, and decided that whatever my body had lost to that stroke, it had not taken my hands. I needed my hands. I had work to do. Ray Foster arrived at 7:40. I heard him before I saw him, his particular walk that measured deliberate pace of a man who has spent 40 years in courtrooms and learned that the way you move tells people everything about the way you think. He came in carrying a leather briefcase that was older than most of my shop equipment, and when he looked at me in that hospital bed, his face did something I had not expected from a 68-year-old man who had seen everything. His eyes went wet. "You old fool," he said, voice rough, setting the briefcase on the chair and gripping my hand hard enough to hurt in the best possible way. "You could have called me from the ambulance." "I was busy not dying," I said. "Sit down, Ray." He sat. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pen that had seen better days, and just like that, 40 years fell away, and we were back in his office on Poplar Avenue, me with grease on my knuckles, and him with a court filing, half-finished, sorting out another problem that looked bigger than it was. "I need everything," I told him. "Public records, business filings, anything with Brandon's name or Cassie's name or Gerald Whitmore's name on it. Property transfers, liens, loan applications. I want to know if there is a single piece of paper in Shelby County that I did not sign myself." Ray's pen had stopped moving. He was looking at me over the top of his reading glasses. "Walt, what do you know?" "I don't know anything yet," I said. "That's the problem." I had been running this business my entire working life, and I never once let a car leave the bay without putting eyes on every system. I let my guard down with my own family. I need to fix that. His jaw tightened. He wrote something on the pad. "I'll pull the state business registry first. If Brandon's name appears on any of your LLC filings, we need to see exactly what it says and when it was added." "He was never supposed to be on any of it," I said. My voice came out harder than I intended. "The shop is mine. The land is mine. I put everything in trust 10 years ago. You were there. I was there, Ray said. And that trust is irrevocable, which means if someone has been quietly working around it, they've had to get creative. He closed the legal pad. I'll have a paralegal on it by 9 o'clock. But Walt, I need you to tell me one more thing. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Do you think Brandon knew about the trust? I thought about my son's face the day I explained it to him. He had been 26, restless, talking about opening a bar downtown. I had sat him down in the shop office with a cup of coffee and walked him through every document Ray had drafted. I remembered the way he had folded his arms and looked at the wall while I talked. He knew, I said. My chest tightened the way it had been tightening all morning. He didn't care then. I don't know what he cares about now. Ray nodded. He stood, snapped the briefcase shut, and then stopped at the door. I'll be back by noon. Don't sign anything while I'm gone. Anyone comes in with papers, doctor, nurse, anyone, you call me first. You think it's that serious? He looked at me steadily, and in his eyes I saw something I had not expected to see from Ray Foster in 40 years of friendship, genuine worry. I think you had a stroke the same week your son left for a $180,000 wedding in Paris. I think serious is probably the right word, yes. He left. I sat with that for a while, my hands folded on top of the blanket, my eyes fixed on the pale ceiling. Mike Schultz showed up at 9:15 right on schedule. Mike was not a large man. He was about 5'9", soft-spoken, with the kind of unremarkable face that made people forget they had seen him. He had been a Memphis PD detective for 22 years before he hung out his own shingle, and in the 6 years since I had used him twice for background checks on business partners. He pulled up a chair without being invited, set a small digital recorder on the nightstand, and looked at me with those flat, careful eyes of his. Tommy called me last night, he said. Before you did. Said something felt wrong. He paused. Your number was in the shop emergency contact binder. Mine was listed right below it. You put it there after the boundary dispute back in 2009. Tommy found it and used it. My throat tightened unexpectedly at the sound of that boy's name. Tommy Briggs, 24 years old, had been working my shop floor for 3 years, and he was the one who had yelled for help when I hit the ground. Tommy's a good kid, I managed. He said he saw Brandon in the shop 2 weeks ago, Mike said, after hours, with a man he didn't recognize. They went into the back office. I held very still. Brandon doesn't have a key to the back office. Mike looked at me. That's what Tommy thought too. A slow, cold feeling moved through me. Not panic, not yet, but the quiet, specific dread of a man who has just heard a sound in an engine that was not there yesterday. What do you need from me? I asked. Dates, names, anything unusual. Every conversation you've had with Brandon about the business in the last 18 months. Anytime Cassie asked you questions about the property or the financials. He had a small notepad out, now pen ready. I want the timeline, Walt. All of it. So I gave it to him. 45 minutes of back and forth, me pulling up memories I had not wanted to look at too closely. Mike writing steadily, asking quiet questions that cut straight to the bone. By the time we finished, my voice was tired and my hands had a faint tremor in them that had nothing to do with the stroke. 48 hours, Mike said, standing, sliding the notepad into his jacket. I'll have something for you by Thursday morning. What are you expecting to find? I asked. He picked up the recorder from the nightstand and tucked it into his pocket. His expression did not change. Honestly, I'm hoping to find nothing. He paused at the door. But I've never hoped for something and found it yet. He left. I leaned back against the pillow, staring at the thin strip of June light still cutting across the floor, and I thought about that back office, about Brandon standing in my shop after dark with a stranger I had never met. My chest ached, not from the stroke, from something much harder to name. I picked up my phone and called Tommy. He answered on the first ring. Mr. Walt, he said, voice catching. Thank God. I'm all right, son, I said, and for a moment my eyes went hot. I just need you to tell me everything you remember about that night. Tommy told me everything in 40 minutes flat, his voice climbing steadily. As the story came out, the way the words do when someone has been holding them in so long, that once the door opens, they cannot come out fast enough. It had been a Tuesday night, 2 weeks back. He had come in late to finish a transmission job he had promised a customer for the following morning. The shop lights were off in the front, the way I always leave them, but there was a glow coming from the back office, thin and wrong, the kind of light a phone screen throws when someone is trying not to be seen. Tommy had stopped in the doorway of the main bay and watched through the interior window. Brandon was at my desk, and with him was a man Tommy had never seen before. Older, heavier, wearing a suit jacket over an open collar shirt. They were looking at papers spread across the desk, and the stranger had a pen in his hand. Did you hear what they were saying? I asked. Some of it. Tommy's voice was unsteady. The man in the suit said, "If the old man doesn't catch it in time, we're clear." And Brandon said, he stopped. Mr. Walt, I don't want to. Tell me, I said. Brandon said he won't. He trusts me. For a moment, I could not speak. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the way it had when the stroke came, but this was different. This was not my body failing. This was understanding arriving like a fist. You did the right thing telling me, I said. My voice held barely. I should have called sooner, Tommy said, and I could hear his breath shaking. I kept thinking maybe it was nothing. Maybe I misheard. I'm sorry, Mr. Walt. I'm so sorry. Tommy. I steadied my own voice because I needed him steady too. You didn't do anything wrong. Now listen to me. Don't talk to Brandon. Don't go into that office. If anyone comes to the shop asking questions that aren't about cars, you call me directly. You understand? Yes, sir, he said. And then quietly, you're going to be all right, aren't you? My eyes went hot. I blinked it back. I intend to be, I told him. I spent the rest of that morning going over what I knew. The stranger with the pen, my desk, papers spread out. The phrase, he won't. He trusts me. By the time Ray walked back into room 214 at 11:50 carrying a manila folder thick enough to stop a door, my hands had been still for 2 hours. Steady. Ready. He set the folder on the rolling table over my bed, pulled up the chair, and opened it without preamble. I'm going to show you something, Walt, he said, and the way his voice had gone flat and professional told me more than the papers themselves. I need you to stay calm. Show me, I said. The first document was a Tennessee Secretary of State filing. Callaway Auto Repair, LLC. Owner of record Walter Callaway and Brandon James Callaway, co-managing members. Filed 14 months ago. I stared at it. I never signed that. No, Ray said. You didn't. My jaw clenched so hard I felt it in my temples. That's my signature, I said. That is my signature on that line, and I did not write it. I know. Ray's voice was even controlled, the voice of a man holding himself together, because one of them had to. There's more. He turned to the next page. A deed of trust on the shop property, the building, the lot, the adjacent storage yard. 4,100 square feet of land my father had helped me buy in 1981. Used as collateral on a commercial line of credit. Balance outstanding $470,000. Origination date 7 months ago. My right hand began to tremble against the blanket. Against the property, I said, not the trust. The trust is untouched. They couldn't get to it. But the shop itself, the building, the real estate it sits on, that was never formally folded into the trust. It was an oversight. Ray's voice tightened for just a fraction of a second. Mine. I should have caught it. I should have gotten everything under that umbrella 10 years ago, and I didn't. Ray. He was looking down at the papers, and I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were pressed flat on the table. "Ray, look at me." He looked up. His eyes were sharp and deeply unhappy. "We fix what's in front of us," I said. "That's all we do. Where does the money go?" He pulled out a third document. A corporate account registered in Delaware under the name Callaway Properties Group, LLC. Principal signatory, Brandon James Callaway. Secondary signatory, Gerald Lee Whitmore. $470,000 had moved through that account over 7 months out of the line of credit on my shop through 3 intermediate transfers and into a holding account Ray's paralegal was still tracing. "Gerald Whitmore," I said. "Cassie's father," Ray confirmed. "Licensed real estate broker. He's been acquiring property in a 6-block radius of your shop for the past 3 years. Small parcels, one at a time, under different ELLCs. He has 11 adjacent parcels now. Yours would be the anchor. Together they're worth somewhere in the range of $6.2 million to a developer looking to build mixed use. I felt it then, the full shape of it, like seeing a blueprint after you have only been looking at individual corners. Gerald Whitmore wanted the whole block. My shop, my land, my name standing in the way. Cassie had come to the family not for love, but for access, and my son had handed her the keys. I did not cry. I wanted to. My eyes burned and my throat was thick, and somewhere deep in my chest there was a pain that no cardiac monitor was ever going to pick up. But I did not cry. "Who is the lender?" I asked. "A private equity firm out of Nashville. Not a bank. They operate in a gray area, technically legal, but they've had 2 predatory lending complaints filed with the Tennessee Department of Financial Institutions in the past 4 years. He paused. "They'll move to foreclose the moment the credit line defaults, which happens when 60 days. The last draw was 63 days ago, which means they are already past the threshold they can file to foreclose at any time. We may have days, not weeks. 60 days. My entire life's work, the building my father helped me pour his savings into the bay, where I had taught my son to change his first oil filter when he was 9 years old, 60 days from becoming leverage in a real estate scheme. File for an emergency injunction," I said, "and get me the name of the best forensic document examiner in Tennessee." Ray was already writing. "There's one more thing." He hesitated, and Ray Foster does not hesitate, which meant whatever came next was bad. Dot Simmons, my accountant of 12 years, a warm woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and a voice that always made me think of someone's grandmother. "What about Dot? She's been receiving payments," Ray said carefully, "from the Callaway Properties Group account. Small ones, $1,200 a month for 8 months. $10,800 total." My stomach dropped. I pressed my hand flat against the blanket and felt my whole body go very still. "Get me her number," I said. "I'll call her myself." Ray looked at me for one long moment, his expression caught somewhere between professional caution and something much older and sadder. "Walt, I built 45 years of trust with that woman," I said, and my voice came out low and rough. "And if someone bought it for $10,000, I want to hear it from her." Dot Simmons picked up on the 4th ring. I had been staring at the window while the phone rang, watching the afternoon light outside go from gold to amber, that particular Memphis summer light that turns everything slow and heavy, like the air itself is thinking. When her voice came through, careful and quiet, something in my chest cracked open just a little. "Walt." Just my name, nothing else. But the way she said it, the weight she put on that one syllable, the way it came out like a confession, told me everything before she said another word. "Dot," I said, "I need you to come to the hospital." A long breath on the other end. "I know," she said. "I've been waiting for you to call." She arrived an hour later, while the evening shift nurses were doing their rounds. Dot Simmons was 61 years old, A small woman with silver hair she kept pinned back, reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, and hands that were always slightly ink-stained, no matter how many times she washed them. She had kept my books for 12 years. She had sent me a handmade card every Christmas, and had cried at my wife Margaret's funeral louder than half the family. I had trusted her the way you trust the floor under your feet, without thinking about it, because it had never once given way. She walked in carrying a brown accordion folder pressed tight against her chest, her eyes red at the edges, her bottom lip held carefully still. When she saw me in the bed, the IV lined the monitors, the hospital gown, her face crumpled for just a moment before she pulled it back together. "Oh, Walt," she breathed, her voice breaking on the second word, and she pressed her free hand flat against her mouth like she was trying to hold something in. "Sit down, Dot," I said gently, "and then tell me everything." She sat. She set the accordion folder on her knees, smoothed her hands over it twice, and then looked at me with eyes that were filling up fast. "I am so sorry," she said. "I should have come to you the moment it started. I kept telling myself I was protecting you, but the truth is I was scared, and being scared made me stupid, and I will never forgive myself for that." My chest tightened. "Start from the beginning," I said. She opened the folder. 8 months ago, Brandon came to the office on a Thursday afternoon. You were in Nashville for the parts supplier meeting, remember? He said he needed some routine paperwork for a business expansion you were planning. He seemed calm, he had all the right answers. He knew the account numbers. She pulled out a stapled set of papers, her hands trembling slightly. "I processed 2 forms for him. I didn't think I should have called you, but he said it was time-sensitive, and you had already approved it verbally." He looked me right in the eye and said, "Dad knows Dot. He just can't deal with the paperwork while he's traveling." My jaw tightened until it ached. "He knows exactly how to talk to people," I said. "He does." Her voice dropped. 3 weeks later, a man named Gerald Whitmore called the office. He said he was a business associate of yours, that you two were working on a joint venture together, and that he needed some historical revenue figures for a loan application. He was polite professional. He referenced conversations you and he had supposedly had. She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I sent him 3 years of quarterly revenue reports." The room felt very still. 3 years of quarterly revenue reports, the kind of documentation a lender uses to assess the value of a business. The kind of documentation Gerald Whitmore would need to show a private equity firm how much Callaway Auto Repair was worth as collateral. "And the payments?" I asked. My voice was level. I made sure of it. Dot's hands tightened on the folder. A tear slipped down her right cheek and she did not wipe it away. 2 months after the Whitmore call, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. It said there were photos of me at Gerald Whitmore's office. It said if I reported what I had done, they would send those photos to you and tell you I had sold your financial data intentionally. She exhaled shakily. The payments started the following week. $1,200 a month deposited directly. I didn't spend it. Walt, I swear to you, I put every dollar in a separate account. I didn't know what else to do. Her voice broke on the last word. Her hands were shaking now, the papers rattling softly in the folder, and her whole body had the look of someone who has been carrying a weight for so long that the act of setting it down hurts almost as much as the carrying. "They blackmailed you," I said. "I let them," she whispered. "That's the part I can't get past. I let them." I reached out and put my hand over hers. Her fingers were cold. "Dot, you came here tonight. You brought the folder." I squeezed her hand once, steady and deliberate. "You're going to give all of that to Ray Foster, and you're going to write down every date, every phone number, every name you remember. And then you're going to be my witness." She looked up at me, tears streaming, now her whole face undone. "After what I did, after what they made you do," I said firmly, There's a difference. And I need you to understand that difference because I need you thinking clearly. Can you do that? She pulled in a long, shuddering breath, nodded once. Then she reached into the accordion folder and pulled out a flash drive. Every file, she said. Copies of everything. I've had it ready for 6 weeks. My heart turned over in my chest. I took the flash drive from her hand and held it carefully. Good, I said. Now, tell me everything about Gerald Whitmore. Dot told me about Gerald Whitmore, the way you describe a man you have been afraid of for a long time, carefully, in pieces, glancing at the door between sentences, as though she half expected him to walk through it. Gerald Lee Whitmore was 61 years old, a licensed real estate broker, operating out of a polished office on Union Avenue, with 2 assistants, a website that looked like money, and a reputation in certain circles as the man who could make a deal happen when other deals had already fallen apart. He was Patricia Whitmore's husband and Cassie's father, and according to Dot, he had been laying the groundwork for this particular deal for the better part of 3 years. He was in the office at least 4 times before I ever knew who he was, Dot said. She had stopped crying, but her hands were still restless in her lap, turning the beaded chain of her glasses over and over. He would come in on the pretense of dropping something off for Brandon. Once he asked to use the printer. Once he said he was waiting for a call and could he sit in the waiting area. Each time I thought nothing of it. She paused. He was mapping the business. He was learning the layout, the routines which cabinets stayed unlocked. He was patient about it. Very patient. Did he ever speak directly to you about the finances? I asked. Once. Her jaw tightened at the memory. He came in alone one afternoon, sat down across from my desk without being invited, and said very conversationally, the way you'd comment on the weather, that he had heard good things about how well organized Walt Calloway's operation was. He said he had some clients who were looking to invest in established businesses, and that if I ever felt like the compensation I was receiving didn't reflect my value, there were people who would appreciate someone with my skill set. She stopped. Her eyes went sharp and unhappy. I should have called you that afternoon. I want you to know I knew in that moment that something was wrong. But he said it in a way that felt like a compliment, not a threat. And She broke off, pressing her lips together. He's good at that, I said. He is. A long, unsteady exhale. 3 weeks later, Brandon brought the paperwork, and I made the worst decision of my professional life. I did not tell her it was not her fault. I did not offer her the comfort of easy absolution because she would not have believed it, and because she did not need comfort right now, she needed to keep talking. What else is on the drive? I asked. She straightened. Something shifted in her posture, the accountant reasserting herself over the frightened woman, like a gear clicking into place. Gerald has been acquiring properties in the 6 blocks surrounding this shop for 3 years. I traced it backward through public filings after the blackmail started. He uses 4 different LLCs, all registered in Delaware, all with nominee signatories, so his name doesn't appear directly. But the tax ID numbers all trace back to the same registered agent. She reached into the folder and produced a printed spreadsheet, 9 pages long. Each row a property address with acquisition date, purchase price, and LLC name. 11 parcels. Total acquisition cost approximately $1.4 million. Current assessed value combined with your property is $6.2 million. Projected sale value to a commercial developer, and there is a developer, Walt. A company called Meridian Development Group out of Atlanta is closer to $8 million. I looked at that spreadsheet. At the addresses I had been passing every day for 45 years, the empty lot on the corner where Tommy sometimes parked customers' overflow vehicles, the narrow building next door that used to be a dry cleaner, the vacant property behind the shop that I had always assumed would eventually become a parking garage. All of it piece by piece quietly assembled around me, like walls going up while I was looking the other direction. He needed my land to complete the block, I said. Your property is this anchor parcel. Without it, the assembly falls apart. Dot's voice had gone steady and technical, and I could see what it cost her to keep it that way, the slight tightening around her eyes, the careful breath before each sentence. Meridian has a development proposal on file with the Memphis-Shelby County Planning Commission. They submitted it 4 months ago. The proposal assumes ownership of all 12 parcels, including yours. My hand gripped the edge of the bed rail. 4 months ago. 4 months ago, I had been in the shop every morning by 7, working alongside Tommy, eating lunch at the counter at Paulette's down the block. Living the same life I had lived for 45 years, and 40 feet away, in Gerald Whitmore's polished office, someone had been drawing lines around everything I owned. Call Ray, I said. Right now. Tell him we need him here tonight. Ray arrived at 8:15, tie loosened reading glasses already on moving, with the particular focused energy of a man who has found solid ground after hours of uncertainty. Dot walked him through the spreadsheet, while I watched from the bed, listening to the two of them build the architecture of what needed to happen next. Ray's pen moved in fast, tight lines across his legal pad. He asked 3 questions per page of the spreadsheet and did not repeat himself once. When Dot finished, Ray set down the pen and looked at me. The emergency injunction needs to go in tomorrow morning. I'm going to file it as a fraud-based motion with supporting documentation, the forged co-owner signature, the unauthorized mortgage, the Callaway Properties Group account, and this spreadsheet. He tapped the papers. Judge Okafor has a reputation for moving fast on financial fraud when the evidence is clean. If this goes in by 9 tomorrow, we could have a temporary restraining order on all transactions involving Callaway Auto Repair and the adjacent parcels by end of day. What does that freeze? I asked. Everything. The credit line draw, any pending deed transfers, Meridian's acquisition process. It won't undo what's already been done, but it stops the bleeding. He paused. It also puts Brandon on notice. The moment this TRO is served, he will know you know. Good, I said. My voice came out harder than I expected. Good. Let him know. Let all of them know. Ray studied me for a moment. I want to bring in a forensic document examiner for the signature on the LLC filing. A man named Lawrence Webb. He has testified in 4 federal fraud cases in Tennessee. His reports hold up in court. I need 48 hours from him. Do it, I said. Dot was looking at me from across the room, her face still carrying the weight of the evening, but behind it, something else, relief maybe. The particular relief of a burden that has been shared. Walt, she said quietly, what are you going to do about Brandon? I looked at the flash drive still in my hand, at everything it contained, at the 6 blocks of a neighborhood that someone had been trying to steal out from under me, one quiet transaction at a time. I'm going to do what I've always done, I said. I'm going to diagnose the problem properly, and then I'm going to fix it. Ray clicked his pen closed. Outside the hospital window, Memphis had gone fully dark, the city lights coming up orange and gold against the night sky. Somewhere across that city, my son was asleep in a Paris hotel room, dreaming of a wedding paid for with money borrowed against my life's work. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Tommy Mr. Walt. Someone came to the shop tonight. Said he was from a property management company. Asked about the lease structure. I told him nothing. What do I do? My grip tightened on the phone. They were already moving. Ray, I said, and he looked up immediately. We don't have 48 hours. We have tonight. Ray was already on his phone before I finished the sentence. He stood at the foot of my bed, one hand pressed flat against the wall, his voice low and precise the way it gets when he has shifted from conversation into action. No more pauses, no more careful weighing of words. Just clean directives delivered one after another, like a man reading from a list he has been building in his head for hours. This is Ray Foster. I need Judge Okafor's emergency line. A pause. I understand it's after 9. Tell her it's a fraud TRO with active asset movement. She'll take the call. I texted Tommy while Ray worked the phone. Do not let anyone into the shop. Lock the back office. If the man comes back, get a photo and call me directly. Do not engage. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, already locked up. Got a partial plate on his car. Gray Nissan Altima, Tennessee tags. Wrote it down. I felt something loosen slightly in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but the specific satisfaction of a young man doing exactly the right thing without being told twice. That boy had good instincts. I had always known it. I texted the plate number directly to Mike Schultz. His reply came in under 2 minutes on it. I'll have a name by morning. Ray lowered the phone, turned to face me. His reading glasses had slid to the end of his nose and his tie was now fully undone, hanging loose on either side of his collar. Judge Okafor will review the emergency filing tonight. I'm emailing the packet to her clerk in the next 20 minutes. If she signs the TRO, we can have it served on the credit line lender first thing tomorrow morning. What about the Callaway Properties Group account? I asked. Included in the freeze request. He was already pulling his laptop from the briefcase, setting it on the rolling table. I'm also naming Gerald Whitmore as a respondent individually and as an officer of Callaway Properties Group. That puts him on notice and prevents him from moving funds overnight. Dot had not left. She was sitting in the chair by the window, her accordion folder on her lap, watching Ray work with the focused attention of someone who has decided that the only way to make right what went wrong is to make herself useful until the job is done. Ray, she said, the registered agent for the Delaware LLCs, I have his contact information on the drive. If you freeze the parent entity, it should cascade to all 4 subsidiaries. Ray looked up. Something shifted in his expression, not quite surprise, but the particular regard of a man recalibrating someone upward. Send it to my paralegal tonight, he said. Her number is in my phone. Tell her I said priority. Already composing this email. Dot said, glasses on phone in hand, fingers moving. I lay back against the pillow and let the two of them work. My body was tired. The stroke had taken something from my stamina that I had not fully accounted for, and the events of the last 12 hours had spent what remained. But my mind was clear. Cleaner than it had been in months, maybe years, because there is a particular clarity that comes when you stop hoping a problem will resolve itself and start treating it like the engine failure it actually is. My phone rang. Brandon. I looked at the screen for 2 full rings, then answered, Dad? His voice was alert, not sleepy. It was nearly 10 o'clock in Paris, which meant he had not been in bed. I just got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Someone told me there's legal activity involving the shop. What's going on? Someone had already called him. Gerald, most likely, or one of Gerald's people monitoring the court filing system. They were faster than I had given them credit for. There's a legal review underway, I said. My voice was calm, steady as a level surface. Routine business matter. Routine. His voice sharpened. Dad, if there's something happening with the business, I have a right to know. I'm listed as co-managing member. That word co-managing member landed in my gut like something cold and heavy. He said it without flinching, without a single hesitation, which told me he knew exactly what he was. You are listed, I said carefully. We'll talk about how that happened when you're back. What does that mean when I'm back? This is my business too. Brandon. I cut him off, not with volume, but with the kind of quiet that stops a room. Go to sleep. Enjoy Paris. And when you come home, we will have a very thorough conversation about everything. A beat of silence on the line. Not my silence, his. The silence of a man trying to read whether his father knows what he knows and finding no answer. Then fine. But I want a call from Ray tomorrow. Ray will be very busy tomorrow, I said. Good night, son. I ended the call. My hand was perfectly steady on the phone. But my eyes were burning, and the ache in my chest, had nothing to do with the stroke and everything to do with the fact that my son had just said, "This is my business too," with the confidence of a man who believed it. And the only reason he believed it was because I had spent 36 years making him feel like everything I built belonged to him. Ray looked over from the laptop. "He knows something's moving." "He knows," I said. "Let him know. I want them nervous." I set the phone face down on the blanket. "How long until Lawrence Webb can get to the LLC filing?" "I called him an hour ago," Ray said, and allowed himself a small, tight smile. "He said he'd have preliminary findings by Thursday noon." Outside, Memphis had gone deep into the night. Somewhere on Union Avenue, Gerald Whitmore was making phone calls. Somewhere over the Atlantic, a Paris-bound flight carried none of the people I needed it to carry. And in room 214 of Memphis General, a 70-year-old mechanic with a mild stroke and a flash drive full of evidence was just getting started. Thursday morning came in through the hospital window, the way bad news sometimes does quietly, without announcing itself, just a slow brightening that turned the ceiling from gray to white while I was still lying there thinking. I had slept 4 hours. Not because the bed was uncomfortable or the monitors too loud, but because my mind had spent the night running calculations the way it does before a big job, checking sequences, looking for gaps, asking the same questions from different angles until the answers held steady. By the time the breakfast cart rattled past my door at 6:30, I had already decided the 3 things I needed to do before noon. Ray arrived at 8 with Lawrence Webb. Webb was a compact man, mid-50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of unhurried precision in his movements that told you immediately he was someone who worked with very small things and very high stakes. He carried a hard-sided case that he set on the rolling table without being asked, and he shook my hand with a grip that was firm and brief and entirely businesslike. "Mr. Calloway," he said. "Ray's told me the situation. I reviewed the LLC filing last night. I have preliminary findings." My pulse picked up. I kept my face level. "Let's hear them." He opened the case and produced 2 side-by-side enlargements, my actual signature pulled from a notarized deed I had signed 7 years ago, and the signature on the fraudulent LLC filing. Even to my untrained eye, the difference was visible once I knew to look the way the loop on the W sat too high, the tail on the Y pulling left instead of right, the pressure distribution across the downstrokes even too careful, the work of someone copying from a reference rather than writing from muscle memory. 12 distinguishing characteristics, Webb said, pointing to each one with a capped pen. The baseline pressure is wrong. Whoever did this is right-handed copying a left-handed writer's natural slant. The connecting stroke between the A and the L in Calloway is a tell your natural hand bridges that gap with a slight upward hook. This document shows a flat connector. Amateur work, but deliberate. He looked at me directly. "In my professional opinion, this signature was not made by you. I will stake my expert testimony on it." Something moved through me that was not quite relief and not quite anger. It was the feeling of having suspected something terrible for days and then having it confirmed. My throat tightened. My hands pressed flat on the blanket. "Thank you, Mr. Webb," I said. My voice came out steady. I was proud of that. Ray was already noting the findings. "I'm filing the expert report with the TRO documentation this morning. Combined with Dot's testimony and the financial records, this gives Judge Okafor a clean fraud picture." Webb closed the case, nodded once to each of us, and left as efficiently as he had arrived. I turned to Ray. "What did Mike find on the plate?" Ray's expression changed. Not dramatically. Ray Foster did not do dramatic, but something tightened around his eyes, in a way I had learned over 40 years to read, as the signal that what came next was going to cost something. "The gray Altima is registered to a property management company called Harlan Realty Consultants. Principal Officer Gerald Whitmore. The man who came to the shop last night is an employee named Dale Pruitt." He works primarily as a site assessor for pre-acquisition properties. Pre-acquisition. Gerald had already sent someone to assess my shop as if it were a property he was preparing to buy. My jaw tightened until I felt it in my back teeth. He's moving the timeline up, I said. He's panicking, Ray said, which makes him more dangerous, not less. When people like Gerald Whitmore start to feel the ground shifting, they don't slow down, they accelerate. We need to be ready for the next move before he makes it. I was about to respond when the door opened and a woman I had not seen before walked in. She was perhaps 40 with a calm, unhurried bearing and the quiet authority of someone who has spent years in rooms where people were at their most frightened and vulnerable. She wore the standard hospital scrubs, a name badge clipped to her chest, Linda Hartwell, RN Patient Services. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm the patient advocate assigned to your floor. Dr. Mercer asked me to look in on you." She glanced at Ray briefly, professionally, then back to me. "I also need to let you know that there's a scheduled consultation this afternoon. A Dr. Harold Voss has been listed as a consulting physician on your chart. I wasn't able to verify who requested the consult." The name hit me like cold water. I looked at Ray. Ray's pen had stopped moving entirely. "Dr. Harold Voss," I said to Linda. "What's his specialty?" "Geriatric neuropsychology," she said. Her voice was even, but her eyes were watching me with the particular careful attention of someone who already suspects the answer to the question she is not asking. Cognitive assessment. Cognitive assessment. Someone had placed a neuropsychological evaluator on my chart without my consent and without a referral from Dr. Mercer. The purpose of such an evaluation was not difficult to determine. It would form the foundation of a petition for conservatorship, a legal instrument that, if granted, would hand control of my finances and my property decisions to another party, to Brandon, or to Gerald Whitmore, or to both. My vision went sharp at the edges. My hands gripped the bed rail, knuckles tightening, and I felt a heat rise in my chest that had nothing to do with the stroke. It was pure, focused outrage, the kind that does not make you loud, but makes you very, very precise. "Ray," I said, "I heard." He was already writing. "I'll have the consult blocked within the hour. No physician can conduct a cognitive assessment on a patient without that patient's informed written consent in Tennessee. We'll put it in the chart today, signed and witnessed." He looked up at Linda. "Can you witness a consent refusal document?" "That's exactly what I'm here for," Linda said. Something in her posture had shifted, a quiet alignment, a decision made. "Mr. Calloway, I want you to know, I flagged this consult to Dr. Mercer myself this morning, before anyone asked me to. Something about the request didn't follow standard protocol." A pause. "If it would help, I can document everything I observed about how this consult appeared on your chart." I looked at this woman, this careful, watchful woman, who had walked into my room uninvited and handed me exactly what I needed. My chest ached with something that felt unexpectedly like gratitude. "Linda," I said, "how long have you been a nurse?" 16 years, she said. "Then you already know what I'm going to ask you to do." She reached into her scrubs pocket and produced a small digital recorder, the kind used for patient notes. She set it on the nightstand beside my phone. "I was thinking the same thing," she said quietly. "When Dr. Voss comes, I'll be in the room." Ray looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. For the first time since Tuesday morning, I saw something in his face that looked almost like confidence. "They went after the wrong 70-year-old, he said. "They did." I agreed. And despite everything, despite the ache in my chest and the burning behind my eyes and 45 years of work sitting under threat 6 blocks away, I felt something settle deep in my bones. Not peace. Not yet. But the solid, certain feeling of a man who has found the problem, traced it to its source, and picked up his tools. We had work to do. Dr. Harold Voss knocked at 2:17 in the afternoon. "I know the exact time," because I had been watching the clock on the wall above the door, since 2 o'clock, the way you watch a gauge when you know a system is running hot. Linda was already in position, standing near the supply cart in the corner, clipboard in hand, the small digital recorder running inside her breast pocket. She had tested it twice. We had exchanged exactly one nod before Voss walked in, and that was enough. He was a tall man, mid-60s, with silver hair swept back from a broad forehead, and the kind of careful, cultivated warmth in his expression that I recognized immediately as professional performance. He wore a white coat over a dark suit, a lanyard with his credentials swinging as he moved. His shoes were expensive. His smile arrived before the rest of him. "Mr. Calloway." He extended a hand. "I'm Dr. Harold Voss. I've been asked to conduct a brief cognitive and neurological assessment as part of your post-stroke recovery protocol. Standard procedure for patients in your age group after a cerebrovascular event." I shook his hand, firm, unhurried. "Who asked you?" I said, a half-beat pause. The smile held. "The request came through your family in coordination with the attending team. Very common in these situations, family members wanting to ensure comprehensive care." "Dr. Mercer didn't order this consult," I said. "Dr. Mercer is your primary—" Voss said smoothly, pulling a chair to my bedside and settling into it with the ease of a man who expected no resistance. "I'm a specialist. Referrals sometimes come through ancillary channels. Now I'd like to begin with some simple orientation questions, if you don't mind." "I do mind," I said. He stopped. The smile recalibrated, still present, but tighter now, adjusted for unexpected friction. "Mr. Calloway, this is a routine—" "Dr. Voss." I kept my voice the same temperature it had been all afternoon. Even. Clear. "Before we go any further, I want to know the name of the person who initiated this referral. Not the channel. The name." His eyes moved briefly to Linda, then back to me. Something passed across his face that he did not quite manage to suppress, a flicker of reassessment, the micro-expression of a man recalculating. "I'm not at liberty to share patient-adjacent communications in that level of detail," he said. "What I can tell you is that this assessment is entirely standard and in your best interest." "In my best interest," I repeated. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from a cold, controlled anger that I had been holding carefully all day. "Dr. Voss, how long have you held your Tennessee medical license?" A pause, shorter this time. "I don't see how that's relevant." "It's relevant because I had someone pull your disciplinary record from the Tennessee Medical Board this morning." I watched his face. The warmth in his eyes went flat. 2 complaints filed in the last 4 years, both involving cognitive assessments that were later disputed by independent evaluators. 1 case in Shelby County, 1 in Davidson. I leaned forward slightly. "Would you like to tell me about those cases, or would you like to tell me who sent you here?" Voss set his pen down on the rolling table, very deliberately, the way a man sets something down when he wants his hands free. His jaw had tightened, and his breath came slightly faster now, just enough for me to see it. "Mr. Calloway, I would advise you not to make accusations you can't substantiate." "I'm not making accusations," I said. "I'm asking questions. There is a legal difference, and I think you know it." I let that sit for exactly 1 breath. "My attorney has been notified that you are in this room. He has your name, your license number, and those 2 complaint case numbers. If this assessment proceeds without my informed written consent, which I have already formally declined, he will file a complaint with the board before 5 o'clock today." Linda spoke from the corner, her voice quiet and completely steady. "Dr. Voss, I am the patient advocate for this floor. For the record, Mr. Calloway submitted a written refusal of this consult at 9:14 this morning, signed and witnessed. I can provide you a copy." Voss turned to look at her. Something happened in his expression that I can only describe as the specific crumbling of a man who has just realized the room he walked into is not the room he was promised. His shoulders dropped a fraction. His hands moved to the arms of the chair, and he pushed himself upright. "I'll need to consult with—" He stopped, started again. "I'll revisit the referral paperwork." "Please do," I said. He picked up his pen. He did not put it in his pocket. He held it in his fist the entire way to the door, like a man who needs something to grip. When the door swung shut behind him, I exhaled slowly through my nose. Linda crossed the room in 4 steps, reached into her pocket, and stopped the recorder. Her hand was perfectly steady, but her eyes were bright with something that looked a great deal like satisfaction. 16 years, she said, and that is the first time I have ever seen a patient dismantle a fraudulent consult before the doctor even opened his assessment form. My mouth curved, not a full smile, not yet, but something real. "Old mechanics," I said. "We diagnose fast." She handed me the recorder. "Ray will want this within the hour." "He'll have it in 20 minutes, I said. And then, because this woman had walked into my room 2 days ago as a stranger, and had since made herself indispensable in the way that only genuinely good people can, I said, "Thank you, Linda, I mean that." Her eyes went soft at the corners. She pressed her lips together and nodded once firmly the way people do when they are not going to let themselves cry at work. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "They'll send someone else." She was right. They always send someone else. Ray walked in at 8:50 Friday morning, carrying coffee he had not touched, and news that changed the shape of the entire week. The temporary restraining order had been signed by Judge Patricia Okafor at 11:47 the previous night. It froze all transactions on Callaway Auto Repair's credit line, suspended the operating authority of Callaway Properties Group, LLC, and its 4 Delaware subsidiaries, and placed a hold on any pending deed transfers involving the 11 parcels Gerald Whitmore had been quietly assembling around my shop. Ray set the signed order on my rolling table, and I read every line of it twice, my right hand completely steady, something loosening in my chest that had been wound tight since Tuesday. "She moved fast," I said. "Clean evidence moves judges," Ray said, pulling up the chair. "Webb's report, Dot's testimony, the financial records, there was nothing soft in that filing." Okafor knew what she was looking at. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "Gerald Whitmore was served this morning at 6:15. His attorney called mine at 6:42. What did he say?" "That his client denies all allegations and intends to contest vigorously." Ray allowed himself a small, dry expression that in 40 years I had learned to read as his version of satisfaction. Which is exactly what a man says when he knows the evidence is real and the only move left is delay. My phone buzzed. "Mike Schultz." I put it on speaker. "Talk to me, Mike." Brandon Callaway and Cassie Whitmore landed at Memphis International 40 minutes ago. Mike's voice was its usual flat, informational calm, but I heard something underneath it, the particular alertness of a man reporting a development he considers significant. They were booked on a return flight for next Sunday. Someone changed those tickets 2 days ago. One-way business class paid on a card I haven't seen on Brandon before, a corporate card registered to Callaway Properties Group. My jaw tightened. Brandon had used the fraudulent corporate account to buy his own plane ticket home. "He knows the TRO went through," Ray said, already writing. "He knew before it went through," I said. "That's why he came back." I looked at the ceiling for one moment, just one, and felt the full weight of what my son had become settle across my chest, like something I would have to carry for the rest of my life. Then I set it aside because I did not have the luxury of grief right now. "Mike, I need you here by 10. Already on my way," he said, and ended the call. They arrived at 9:22. I heard Cassie's heels in the hallway, first that same rhythm I had memorized in this same hospital corridor 4 days ago, except faster now, sharper, carrying a different energy entirely. Brandon pushed the door open and came in ahead of her, still in travel clothes, his face carrying the compressed, urgent expression of a man who had rehearsed a conversation on a 9-hour flight and was ready to deliver it. He looked at Ray. His expression flickered. "I need to speak with my father alone," he said. "Ray stays," I said. Brandon's eyes came to mine. For a moment, just a moment, I saw something in his face that looked like the boy I remembered. Something young and frightened and caught. Then it closed over and the man in the expensive travel jacket was back. "Dad, I know there's been some kind of legal filing. I need you to understand that whatever you've been told, it's been taken out of context. I can explain everything." "I'd like to hear that explanation," I said. "Sit down, Brandon." He sat. Cassie positioned herself just behind his left shoulder, one hand resting on the back of his chair. Her face was composed with a care that told me how much effort it was costing her. She had dark circles under her eyes that her makeup had not quite covered, and something in the set of her mouth was tighter than the last time I had seen her. "The business filing," Brandon began. "The co-managing member edition. That was something we discussed last year, Dad. You said you wanted me more involved. You said—" "I said that," I asked. "You implied it. At Thanksgiving. You were talking about succession planning, about wanting me to have a real role." "Brandon." My voice came out quiet and very clear. "I have never, in 45 years of running that business, added anyone to a legal filing based on an implication at a dinner table. And you know that." His jaw worked. "The signature is legitimate." "Lawrence Webb disagrees," Ray said. "In writing, with 12 documented distinguishing characteristics." The color shifted in Brandon's face. Not a flush more, like a draining a pallor moving through the skin, the way cold moves through metal. Cassie's hand tightened on the back of his chair. "Who is Lawrence Webb?" Brandon asked, and his voice had gone careful in a way that told me he already knew the answer was bad. "Forensic document examiner," Ray said. 4 federal cases. His testimony holds." He opened the folder in his lap and slid a single page across the rolling table. "That's his preliminary report. You're welcome to read it." Brandon did not pick up the page. He looked at it the way you look at something you do not want to confirm is real. Cassie spoke then, and her voice was different from any version of it I had heard before, lower stripped of the careful warmth, something harder underneath. "Walt, we understand this looks bad. But if you're willing to talk about this as a family without attorneys—" "Cassie." I turned to look at her directly. "My attorney is my family. He has been for 40 years. The people who forged my signature on a business filing are not." She pulled in a short, sharp breath. Her composure did not break, but it bent. I saw it, in the way her eyes went wide for just a fraction of a second before she reassembled herself. Brandon's hands were on his knees now, pressing down hard, the knuckles gone pale. "The credit line," he said. His voice had dropped. "The 470,000. I can explain that too. It was a short-term business strategy. The money was going to come back. Through Callaway Properties Group," I said. "Registered in Delaware. Co-signed by Gerald Whitmore." The room went very still, not the stillness of people who have nothing to say, but the stillness of people who have just heard the one sentence that confirms the other person knows everything. Brandon's breath came out audibly. Cassie's hand left the back of his chair entirely. "Dad," Brandon said, and his voice cracked on that single word in a way that made my eyes burn hot and fast, because underneath all of it, underneath the fraud and the forgery and the $470,000, that was still my son's voice, still the voice of the boy I had carried through a parking lot at 6 years old. "Dad, I was going to fix it. I swear to you I was going to fix it before you ever found out." My chest hurt so deeply in that moment that I pressed my hand flat against it without thinking. "I know you believed that," I said. "And I meant it. That was the worst part. I meant every word of it." But believing you can fix something doesn't make what you did to get there right. And it doesn't make me the man who looks away. Brandon put his face in his hands. Cassie looked at me over the top of his bowed head, and for the first time since I had known her, there was nothing calculated in her expression at all. Just a woman standing in a room where the plan had come apart trying to figure out what came next. Mike Schultz knocked on the door at exactly 10 o'clock. "Right on time," I said, and reached for the folder on my nightstand. Mike Schultz walked into room 214, the way he always walks into a room, like he has already been there for 5 minutes and is simply making his presence official. He nodded once to Ray, glanced at Brandon and Cassie, with the flat professional assessment of a man who catalogs people the way others catalog license plates, and set his folder on my rolling table without being invited. Brandon was still sitting with his face in his hands. Cassie had straightened up, arms folded tight across her chest, her jaw set in a way that told me she had shifted from grief-adjacent into something harder and more defensive. Neither of them had spoken since I said what I said. The room held the particular charge of words that cannot be taken back. "Mike," I said, "tell me what you found." He opened the folder. No preamble, no throat clearing. That was one of the things I valued most about Mike Schultz. He treated information the way I treated a diagnostic report. Facts first. Feelings after, if at all. "Brandon James Calloway," he began, and I watched my son's hands drop from his face at the sound of his own full name spoken in that tone. "Terminated from Meridian Financial Group 8 months ago. Cause misappropriation of client account funds. The termination was settled privately, no public record, no lawsuit, because Meridian preferred a quiet exit to a public scandal. Brandon signed a non-disclosure agreement." Mike turned a page. "He has been unemployed since. Current monthly expenses average $11,000. Primary income source for the past 7 months, funds drawn from the Callaway Properties Group account." The silence that came out of Brandon then was not a chosen quiet. It was the silence of a man who has had the floor pulled from under him and has not yet landed. His breath came out in a long, ragged exhale, and he pressed both hands flat on his thighs like he needed to feel something solid. "That account was funded by the fraudulent mortgage on my shop." I said not to Mike, he knew, but to the room, to Brandon, to Cassie, to whatever remained of the possibility that any of this had been a misunderstanding. Mike turned another page. "Cassie Whitmore, prior to the engagement, maintained a separate financial relationship with her father, Gerald Whitmore's holding company. She is listed as a consultant on 2 of the 4 Delaware LLCs involved in the land acquisition. Her compensation over 14 months, $68,000. Cassie's arms unfolded. Her hands came up and gripped the back of Brandon's chair again, but differently this time. Not the steadying gesture of someone managing a situation, but the grip of someone who needs support herself. Her face had gone pale in a way that her carefully applied makeup could not disguise, a pallor spreading from the jaw down the throat, and her eyes, when they found mine, were bright with something I could not entirely read. Anger maybe, or fear, or the particular desperation shown of a woman watching a door close that she had spent years walking toward. "That consulting work was legitimate," she said. Her voice was controlled, but the edges of it were fraying. "I provided market analysis. It was professional work. For LLCs that were secretly encircling my property while you were engaged to my son," I said. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. "While you were sitting at my dinner table and calling me Walt." Her breath caught. She pressed her lips together hard enough to go white at the corners. Mike turned the final page. "Gerald Lee Whitmore. In addition to the land acquisition activity already documented, I found a filing from 3 weeks ago." He set a single sheet on the table and turned it to face me. "A petition for conservatorship of Walter James Calloway, prepared but not yet filed. The petition cites cognitive decline following cerebrovascular event inability to manage financial affairs and risk of self-harm through financial mismanagement. He paused barely just long enough to let the words exist in the air. The supporting psychiatric evaluation was to be provided by Dr. Harold Voss. Brandon made a sound that was not quite a word. His hands came up and covered his mouth, and above them his eyes went red and glassy, and I watched my son realize fully, completely, in a way he could not defer or diminish exactly what the people around him had been building. "Brandon," I said, and my throat was tight with an ache I had no name for. "Did you know about the conservatorship?" He shook his head, fast, desperate. "No, Dad. I swear the land, the money, I knew about that, I was part of that, but this—" His voice broke open on the last word, cracked straight down the middle. I did not know they were going to try to take you." I looked at my son's face. 45 years of knowing him, of reading every expression, every tell, every way he had, of not quite meeting my eyes when he was lying, and not quite catching his breath when he was telling the truth. He was telling the truth. It did not make what he had done smaller. But it mattered. "Ray," I said, "file the conservatorship counterclaim today. Name Gerald Whitmore as the petitioner and attach the Voss recording." "Already drafted," Ray said. Cassie's voice came out unsteady and low. "Walt, please, if you'll just let me—" "Cassie." I turned to her, and I was not unkind, but I was not soft either. "I think you should call your father. Tell him what just happened in this room. And then I think you should find yourself a very good attorney, because you are going to need one." She stared at me for one long moment. Then she picked up her bag from the floor, and she walked out of room 214 without another word, her heels striking the tile with a sound that rang down the hallway and faded and did not come back. Before I reveal what happened when Gerald Whitmore stepped into room 214, comment ready, so I know you are still here. Because everything we have been building toward, every document, every recording, every quiet move I made from that hospital bed, it all comes down to the next 5 minutes. A quick note: portions of this story are fictional, shaped to carry a message worth hearing. If you have reached your limit, this is your moment to step out gracefully, otherwise stay close. It is about to get very real. For about 90 seconds after Cassie left, it was just Brandon and me. He was still in the chair, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor, with the particular devastation of a man who has just watched the version of himself he thought he was get taken apart, piece by piece, in front of his father. His eyes were wet. He was not crying, not yet, but he was right at the edge of it. His jaw tight, his breath coming in the careful, controlled intervals of someone trying hard not to come undone entirely. I did not fill the space with words. I let him sit in it. Sometimes that is the only honest thing you can do. Then he looked up at me and his voice came out wrecked and quiet. "I told myself I was protecting you, that you'd worked hard enough and it was time for someone else to carry the load. That Gerald had a real plan and the money would come back and you'd never even have to know it was borrowed." He pressed one hand over his eyes. "I told myself a lot of things." "I know," I said. My chest was an open wound. "You always were good at telling yourself what you needed to hear." He let out a breath that was very close to a sob and caught it just before it broke. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know that doesn't—" The door opened. Gerald Whitmore walked in like a man who owns the room he is entering. He was broad-shouldered, well-dressed in the way of someone who considers their appearance a professional instrument, with silver at his temples and a jawline that carried decades of practiced confidence. Behind him came Patricia Whitmore, smaller, softer-looking, but with eyes that were quick and assessing in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of Cassie. She had a hand on Gerald's arm but was not gripping it, more like resting, more like a woman who has learned to look calm in difficult rooms. Gerald looked at Ray, at Mike, at Brandon, who had straightened up and gone very still, then at me. "Walt," he said, and his voice carried the warm, unhurried register of a man who has decided to begin from a position of reasonableness. "I think we've gotten to a point where it would benefit everyone to have an honest conversation." "I've been having honest conversations all week," I said. "Sit down, Gerald." He sat in the chair Cassie had vacated, Patricia taking a position slightly behind him, hands folded at her waist. Brandon shifted his chair a few inches away from Gerald, a small movement barely perceptible, but I saw it. Ray saw it too. "The TRO is an overreaction," Gerald said, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees, in the posture of a man making a reasonable case. "I understand why Ray filed it given what things look like from your vantage point. But what you're seeing as fraud is actually a business arrangement that Brandon and I structured together with the intention of growing your assets, not diminishing them. The land consolidation. The land you've been quietly buying around my shop for 3 years," I said. He did not flinch. "Strategic acquisition. The Memphis market is moving, Walt. That corridor is going to triple in value inside 5 years. I was positioning your family to benefit from that movement. The Meridian deal alone would have netted you $2.4 million above what you paid," I said, "with my land as the anchor, without my knowledge, without my consent." Gerald's jaw shifted. The reasonableness in his voice tightened by one small degree. "The intent was always to bring you in at the right moment, to present you with something fully formed rather than a half-built plan that would have raised unnecessary concern." "Unnecessary concern," I repeated. Ray made a quiet sound beside me that was not quite a laugh. Patricia spoke then, and her voice was softer than her husband's, but no less deliberate. "Walt, we are family, or we will be. Cassie loves Brandon. Whatever mistakes were made in the business side of things, that is real. And it would be a tragedy to let legal proceedings destroy something that doesn't have to be destroyed." I looked at this woman, this well-dressed, soft-spoken woman, who had come into my hospital room to talk to me about family, while her husband had spent 3 years building a financial trap around my life's work. My eyes burned. Not from grief. From something much harder to name, the exhaustion of having to be unmoved by things that should not have to be moved around. "Patricia," I said, "I want to believe that you mean that. I genuinely do. But your husband forged my signature on a legal document. Your daughter accepted $68,000 in consulting fees from LLCs designed to acquire my property without my knowledge. And someone in your family's orbit placed an unethical physician on my medical chart to have me declared incompetent." I paused. "That is not a business misunderstanding. That is a coordinated effort to take everything I built." Patricia's hand dropped from Gerald's arm. Something moved across her face, not guilt exactly, but the particular expression of a woman hearing a complete picture for the first time and finding it does not match the partial version she was given. Gerald's composure cracked then. Just a fraction, a tightening around the eyes, a forward movement in the jaw. "The conservatorship petition was a contingency. It was never filed. It was a preparation against the possibility that your health declined and decisions needed to be made quickly. By you," I said. "Decisions about my property, made by you, by family. You are not my family." My voice came out low and absolutely clear. "You are a man who looked at 45 years of work and saw an opportunity. And I want you to hear me when I say this. Gerald Ray has filed the conservatorship counterclaim this morning. Lawrence Webb's expert report is attached. The recording of Dr. Voss's visit is attached. Dot Simmons has given a full witness statement. And Mike Schultz's investigative report covers every transaction, every LLC filing, every property acquisition in that 6-block radius." I held his eyes. "The TRO is not an overreaction. It is the first step. Gerald was very still. The practiced ease had left his posture entirely, and what remained was a man calculating in real time, running the numbers, and finding they did not work. My phone buzzed. Tommy. 3 men outside the shop in a black SUV since 7 this morning. Haven't moved. Want me to call someone? I looked at Mike. He had already seen it over my shoulder. I'll handle it, Mike said, standing phone to his ear before he reached the door. Gerald watched Mike leave. Something shifted in his expression, a new calculation, a downward revision. He stood slowly, straightened his jacket. I think we should let our attorneys handle this from here, he said. I think that's the first sensible thing you've said, Ray replied. Gerald looked at me one last time. I met his eyes without blinking, without anger, without the satisfaction he might have expected. Just steady, just clear. He walked out. Patricia paused at the door, turned back and looked at me with an expression I was not prepared for. Something raw and complicated, something that looked almost like an apology, the kind that comes too late, but is real nonetheless. Then she followed her husband out. Brandon had not moved. He was looking at the door they had gone through, his hands loose in his lap, and when he turned back to me, his face was open in a way I had not seen since he was a teenager. All the defensive architecture gone, just a man sitting in the wreckage of the choices he had made. Dad, he said, what do I do now? I looked at my son for a long moment, my chest aching all the way through. You start, I said, by telling me everything, from the beginning. Every meeting, every signature, every conversation with Gerald. All of it. I reached over and picked up the small recorder from the nightstand. Linda's recorder still charged, still ready. And we do it on the record. Brandon closed his eyes, nodded once. His hands were shaking on his knees, and then he began to talk. Brandon talked for 2 hours and 19 minutes. I know, because Ray kept his eyes on the clock at the end, tallying the time the way he tallies everything, precisely, without comment. I kept my eyes on my son. On the way his hands moved when he described something he was ashamed of, pressed flat on his knees, as if he were trying to hold himself down. On the way his voice changed register when he got to the parts that cost him the most. Dropping lower, roughing up at the edges. The words coming out slower, like a man lifting something heavy, one piece at a time. He told me everything. He told me that Gerald had first approached him 14 months ago at a dinner. A casual thing, a Sunday evening at the Whitmore house, Patricia's cooking. The kind of evening that feels like family, before you understand what family is being used for. Gerald had laid it out, simply. The Memphis corridor was changing the land around Callaway Auto Repair, was worth multiples of its assessed value. And if the right person could consolidate the right parcels at the right moment, the return would be generational. He said the word generational. Brandon told me, his voice hollow. He said, your father built something. You could multiply it. And I. He stopped, pressed his lips together. His eyes were wet, and he was not trying to hide it anymore. I wanted that to be true. I wanted to be the one who finally did something that made you look at me the way you look at the shop. Like it meant something. Like I meant something. My throat closed. I kept my face still. I did not trust myself to speak. Gerald said the co-managing member filing was a formality, that it just needed to be in place for the loan structure to work. He had a notary, a man named Robert Harlan, who he said handled sensitive business documents for high-net-worth clients all the time. I signed off on the process. I told myself you would understand when you saw the results. He exhaled, shuddering. I told myself a lot of things. The $470,000, I said. My voice came out level. Where did it go? Brandon looked at the window. Outside, the Memphis sky had gone the flat, heavy white of a day that could not decide whether to storm. Gerald controlled the disbursements. I saw the account statements, money moved in, money moved out. It looked like acquisition costs for the parcels. I didn't track every transaction. I should have. I know I should have. He turned back to me. I didn't know about the Callaway Properties group card until it was already in my name. Gerald said it was standard for a co-managing member to have operating access. Ray leaned forward. Brandon, did Gerald ever mention Meridian Development Group directly to you? Yes. The word came out flat and certain. He told me Meridian was the exit buyer, that once the full block was assembled, the sale to Meridian would clear between 6 and 8 million. My share? He stopped. His jaw tightened. He told me my share would be enough to pay back everything and have 2 million left over. Ray wrote something down. His pen moved fast and deliberate. Did he say anything about what would happen if your father discovered the arrangement before the sale closed? Ray asked. Brandon's hands clenched on his knees until the knuckles went white. He said not to worry. That if Walt became a problem, there were legal instruments that could... He stopped again. His face crumpled for just a moment, a raw, unguarded moment of a man confronting the full meaning of his own words. He said there were ways to ensure the business decisions got made efficiently. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. His voice dropped to almost nothing. That was the worst thing I did, Dad. Not the forgery, not the money. The worst thing I did was not ask. The room was very quiet for a moment. Nothing but the monitor beeping its steady rhythm and the sound of Ray's pen. My eyes were burning. Not with anger. With something much harder to carry, the grief of a father who sees exactly where he failed, exactly which door he left open, exactly how love without clear eyes becomes a kind of permission for the wrong things to grow. Ray, I said, copy that recording and file it with the TRO evidence today. It's already uploading, Ray said. My phone buzzed. Mike, 3 men in the SUV work for a security firm contracted by Harlan Realty. Not law enforcement. They've been there since 6:45 a.m. Tommy handled it well, didn't engage, just documented. I've notified Memphis PD. They'll move the vehicle within the hour. But Walt, there's something else. I typed back, tell me. Robert Harlan, the notary on the LLC filing. He filed a voluntary disclosure with the Tennessee Secretary of State this morning. He's saying he was pressured by Gerald Whitmore to notarize documents without verifying signatory identity. He's cooperating. I read that twice. Then I handed the phone to Ray. Ray read it, and something moved across his face that I had not seen in 40 years of knowing him. Something that looked for just a brief and unguarded moment, like relief. He looked up at me over the top of his reading glasses. Harlan flipped, he said. Harlan flipped, I confirmed. Brandon had been watching us. What does that mean? He asked, his voice small and unsteady. It means, I said, setting the phone down carefully, that your father-in-law is running out of walls to put his back against. I looked at my son, this man, this boy, this complicated and broken and still mine person, sitting in a hospital chair at the end of the worst week of both our lives. And it means if you're going to come through this with anything intact, you need to do exactly what Ray tells you to do, starting right now. Brandon nodded. His hands were shaking. His eyes were full. Okay? He said. Just that. Just one word barely held together. It was enough. The knock that came at 3:40 that afternoon was different from every other knock that week. It was not the brisk, professional tap of a nurse checking in. It was not Ray's measured 3-count. It was 2 knocks firm and deliberate, with the particular authority of people who are accustomed to doors being opened for them. I looked at Ray. He was already on his feet. The door opened, and 2 people walked in, who had not been in my room before, wearing the quiet, unremarkable clothes of people who do not need uniforms to communicate what they are. The woman was perhaps 45, with close-cropped brown hair and eyes that moved across the room in a single sweep and missed nothing. The man behind her was younger, broader, a notepad already open in his hand. Mr. Walter Calloway, the woman said. It was not a question. I'm Special Agent Dana Reeves, FBI Financial Crimes Division. This is Agent Tom Grayfield. She produced credentials and held them long enough to be read properly. We're here in connection with an active investigation into mortgage fraud, wire fraud, and forgery of financial instruments. We understand you may have information relevant to that investigation. Brandon made a sound beside me, not words, just a sharp exhale. The sound a man makes when something he knew was coming arrives and is still worse than he prepared for. My attorney is present, I said, nodding toward Ray. Agent Reeves looked at Ray with the brief mutual acknowledgement of two professionals who have operated in the same legal ecosystem long enough to recognize each other's function. Mr. Foster, we're not here to compel anything today. We're here because Robert Harlan's voluntary disclosure this morning named Gerald Whitmore as the primary architect of a scheme involving fraudulent property filings in Shelby County, and at least 2 instances of wire fraud crossing state lines into Delaware and Georgia. She paused. Mr. Calloway, your name appears as the victim on every document we've reviewed. We'd like to understand the full scope of what you know. I looked at Ray. He gave me one small nod. Sit down, Agent Reeves, I said. You're going to want the flash drive. The next 40 minutes moved with the efficient, slightly surreal momentum of a process that has already been set in motion and simply needs to run. Ray produced Dot's flash drive. Agent Grayfield connected it to a government laptop and worked through the files with the methodical speed of someone who knows exactly what he is looking for. Agent Reeves asked questions clean, precise, no redundancy, and I answered them all. Every date, every document, every name. Brandon sat beside me and answered his own questions when she turned to him, his voice steady in a way it had not been all day, the particular steadiness of a man who has made a decision and is living inside it. Halfway through the session, Brandon's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face changed the color, shifting, something tightening behind his eyes. He looked at me. Cassie, he said. Agent Reeves said, you can take it. We're not recording this room. He answered it. I could hear her voice through the phone, not the words, just the tone, which was high and fast, and carrying the specific pitch of fear poorly disguised as urgency. Brandon listened for about 30 seconds, his jaw working, his free hand pressing flat against his thigh. Cassie, he said finally, stop. Listen to me. His voice was quiet, but it had a new quality in it that I was hearing for the first time, not the careful, managed tone of a man keeping everyone comfortable, but something firmer, something that had decided. I already told them everything. I've been talking for 3 hours. It's done. A pause, her voice rising on the other end. No, I'm not going to, Cassie. Your father used me. He used both of us. I signed things I should never have signed, and I let it happen, and I have to answer for that. But I am not going to lie to federal agents to protect a man who was willing to have my father declared incompetent to close a real estate deal. The room was very still around those words. Agent Reeves made no expression. Agent Grayfield's pen had stopped. Brandon's voice cracked on the last sentence just slightly, just enough to hear the cost of it, and he pressed on through it. Get a lawyer, Cassie. A good one. That's all I can tell you. He ended the call. Set the phone face down on his knee. His hand was trembling visibly, his breath coming in careful, deliberate intervals, a man holding himself together by will alone. He turned back to Agent Reeves. Where were we? He said. Agent Reeves looked at him for one moment, with an expression that was professional and completely neutral, but contained in some quality of its steadiness, a kind of respect. The Delaware wire transfers, she said. Walk me through the dates. Brandon nodded and kept going. When the agents finally stood to leave 40 minutes later, Agent Reeves stopped at the door and turned back to me. Mr. Calloway, Based on what we've reviewed today, we'll be moving to a grand jury referral for Gerald Whitmore. Robert Harlan's cooperation significantly accelerates that timeline. You should expect this to move quickly. She paused. I want you to know, in 22 years of financial crimes work, I don't often see a victim who documented their own case as thoroughly as you did before we arrived. My throat tightened unexpectedly. My eyes stung at the corners. I'm a mechanic, I said. We keep records. Something moved at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, but the closest approximation. Yes, sir, she said. You do. They left. The room exhaled around me. Brandon sat forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, face in his hands. Not crying, not quite, but close enough that the difference did not matter. His shoulders shook once, twice, then went still. I reached over and put my hand on his back. Just rested it there, heavy and warm and real. Neither of us needed to say anything. Some things are communicated better through the weight of a hand than through any words a man can find. Ray's text came in at 6:04 Saturday morning, before the breakfast cart, before the shift change, before Memphis had fully decided to be awake. Gerald retained Philip Stanton. Stanton filed a motion to quash the grand jury referral at 11 p.m. Judge Okafor denied it at midnight. Gerald is out of moves on that front. Call me when you're up. I read it twice, set the phone on my chest, and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Outside the window, the sky was the particular pale blue of a Memphis summer morning that has not yet been ruined by heat. Birds were doing something in the oak tree visible from my bed. Life was continuing in all its ordinary ways, while a 61-year-old real estate broker in a suit 2 miles away was discovering that midnight judges do not take kindly to motions filed in bad faith. I called Ray at 6:15. Stanton is Gerald's best play, Ray said without preamble, his voice carrying the crisp alertness of a man who had probably not slept much either. But best play does not mean good play. The motion to quash had no evidentiary basis. Gerald was trying to buy time. Okafor saw it for what it was. What does he do next? I asked. He'll try to cut a deal, Ray said. His attorney will approach the U.S. Attorney's Office within 48 hours and offer something cooperation on a related matter, asset disclosure, something. It's what cornered men do. A pause. The question is whether he gives up something bigger than himself to reduce his own exposure. Is there something bigger? I asked. Ray was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Meridian Development Group. Walt. I've been looking at their filing history. They've done this before. Targeted urban corridors, acquired anchor parcels through third-party intermediaries, used predatory lending structures to force out resistant owners. Memphis is not their first city. Nashville, Birmingham, one project in Atlanta that is currently under separate federal review. Another pause. Gerald may be a cog, not the engine. I let that settle. The birds outside were still moving in the oak tree, unbothered by the architecture of human greed. Let the FBI handle Meridian, I said. Our job is to protect the shop and the land. Everything else is downstream. Agreed, Ray said. I'll have an update from Reeves by noon. I ended the call. For about 10 minutes, I simply lay there, breathing, feeling the quiet of the room. The beeping monitor. The weight of a week that had started with a stroke and arrived here at the edge of a federal grand jury, proceeding with my son in a cooperation agreement, and my name on the victim list of something that turned out to be larger than I had initially understood. My phone rang. Brandon. He was calling from outside. I could hear traffic. A light wind, the ambient sound of a city morning. His voice was tight and careful. Dad, Gerald called me 40 minutes ago. My grip tightened on the phone. What did he say? He said. Brandon stopped. A breath. He said if I retracted my cooperation statement, he would take full responsibility for the financial structure and tell the FBI it was entirely his idea without my knowledge. He said he could make it, so I walked away clean. A pause that had weight in it. He said Cassie would not survive this if I didn't. My chest tightened. I pressed my free hand flat against the blanket. Brandon, listen to me very carefully. What Gerald is describing is witness tampering. He is committing a federal crime on a phone call that is almost certainly being monitored. A sharp intake of breath. You think they're listening? I think a man whose grand jury motion was denied at midnight and who calls his cooperating witness at dawn is not making careful decisions. I said, I think you need to call Ray right now before you do anything else and tell him exactly what Gerald said word for word. Okay. His voice had steadied. Okay, yes. I'll call him. A beat. Dad, he said Cassie doesn't know he called me. He said she's not doing well. I closed my eyes for a moment. The ache in my chest was complicated and old and had no clean resolution. That is not your problem to fix right now, I said. Your problem is making sure that call gets reported. Go. He went. Agent Reeves called at 9:50. Her voice had a particular quality it had not carried the day before, a focused energy, the sound of a case that has just accelerated. Mr. Calloway. Brandon reported the call from Gerald Whitmore to his handling agent at 7:15 this morning. We had a court order on Gerald's outgoing communications as of yesterday afternoon. We have the call. A pause. Witness tampering on top of the existing charges. I want you to know Gerald Whitmore is not going to be able to negotiate his way out of this. My throat tightened. My eyes went hot and fast at the corners, and I pressed my fingers against them hard, not ready to let go yet. Not here. Not now. Thank you, Agent Reeves, I said. Thank your son, she said. He made the right call, twice. When I set the phone down, my hand was shaking slightly. Not from the stroke, not from fear, but from the specific physical release of a tension that has been held for too long, finally beginning to ease. I pressed both hands against my face and breathed for a long moment, and my eyes were wet. And I let them be wet because there was nobody in the room to see it, and because I had earned it. Gerald Whitmore had called my son at dawn to offer him a way out, and my son had called his lawyer instead. 45 years of building something, 1 week of fighting for it, and my son at the end of it had chosen right. On Sunday morning, 6 days after a stroke had put me on my back in room 214 of Memphis, General Dr. Stephen Mercer stood in the doorway with a discharge form and the expression of a man delivering news he is genuinely glad to deliver. Blood pressure is normalized, he said, setting the clipboard on my rolling table. Motor function is back to baseline. Cognitively, he allowed himself a small dry smile. You appear to have been functioning well above baseline all week, which I suspect had very little to do with my treatment plan. Your treatment plan kept me alive, I said. I'll take credit for the rest. He laughed, a real one, short and warm. Sign the bottom line, Mr. Calloway, and do me a favor, don't come back for at least a month. I signed. And then I did something I had not done in 6 days. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, planted both feet on the floor, and stood up. My legs held. Not perfectly, there was a slight unsteadiness in the first 2 seconds. A recalibration, the body remembering its instructions, but they held. I stood there in that hospital room in the particular morning light of a Memphis Sunday and felt the floor solid under me and thought, good, good. Tommy was waiting in the parking lot. He was leaning against his truck, a battered red Ford that he had rebuilt himself piece by piece over 18 months in my shop. And when he saw me come through the exit doors, he straightened up fast, and his whole face opened up the way young faces do when they have been worried for a long time, and the worry has just been lifted. His eyes went wet immediately, which he tried to hide by looking at the truck, which fooled nobody. Mr. Walt, he said, his voice coming out rough and unsteady. You look good. You're a terrible liar, I said. Come here. He crossed the distance in 3 steps, and I put my arms around that boy, and held on for a moment, and he held on too, his shoulders shaking once before he pulled himself together. When we stepped back, his eyes were red at the edges, and he was blinking fast and hard. "The shop is good," he said, voice still rough. "I kept everything running. Mrs. Hendricks picked up her Camry Thursday. The Morrison transmission job is done. I logged everything in the system." "I know you did," I said. My own throat was tight. I never doubted it for a single day. He nodded, pressing his lips together, and opened the passenger door for me without being asked. We were 10 minutes from the hospital on the broad curve of Summer Avenue, with the Sunday morning traffic moving easy around us when my phone rang. A number I did not recognize. I almost let it go. Then something made me answer. "Walt." Patricia Whitmore's voice. Quiet, careful, carrying a weight in it that had nothing to do with strategy. "I hope you'll forgive me for calling directly." I straightened in the seat. Tommy glanced at me once and kept his eyes on the road. "I'm listening, Patricia," I said. "I need you to know something." She paused, and in the pause I heard the particular sound of a woman choosing her words with great care because she has already spent too many years choosing the wrong ones. "I did not know about the forgery, about the conservatorship petition, about the doctor. I knew Gerald was working on a land deal. I knew Brandon was involved. I told myself it was business, and business was not my area, and that was the most expensive lie I have ever told myself." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she steadied it with an audible effort. "Cassie did not tell me the full scope of it either. I think she told herself the same lies I told myself." My chest ached. I looked out the window at Memphis, going by the churches and the barbecue signs and the old houses with their wide porches, and felt the complicated weight of a situation in which the damage had been real, and the people who caused it were not uniformly monstrous, which is always the harder kind to process. "Why are you telling me this, Patricia?" I asked. "Because Cassie filed for divorce from Brandon this morning." Her voice had gone very quiet. "And because she is sitting in my kitchen right now, not eating and not speaking to anyone. And I think she is more lost than she has ever been in her life. And I don't know how to help her. And I thought—" She stopped. "I don't know what I thought. I just needed you to know that I am sorry. Not because it changes the legal situation. Just because it is true." I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the ache there, deep and old, and without a clean name. "Patricia," I said carefully, "I believe you, and I am sorry for the part of this that is your pain too." I paused. "But I cannot fix what Gerald built by accepting an apology for it. You understand that?" "I do," she said. Her voice broke cleanly on those two words, and she did not try to repair it. "I just needed you to hear it." "I heard it," I said. She ended the call. Tommy drove. The Sunday morning light came through the windshield, gold and warm, the way Memphis light does when the day is going to be decent, and I sat with my hand still pressed to my chest and my eyes burning at the corners. "Everything okay?" Tommy asked. I looked at this young man, this 24-year-old, who had kept my shop running and cried in a parking lot, and never once asked for anything in return. "It will be," I said, and I meant it. The shop came into view around the next curve, the Callaway Auto Repair sign bright in the morning sun, and something in my chest that had been wound tight for 6 days finally slowly began to release. I was home. The smell hit me before anything else. Motor oil and metal shavings and the particular dusty warmth of a shop that has been running all week without its owner. That smell that I have been walking into every morning for 45 years, that I could find blindfolded at 3 in the morning, that is as much a part of me as my own hands. The moment Tommy pushed open the bay door and it rolled up, and that smell came out into the Sunday morning air, something in my chest broke open in the best possible way, and I had to stand there for a moment, both hands at my sides, jaw tight, eyes burning, just breathing it in. "You all right?" Tommy asked from beside me, his voice careful. "Better than all right," I managed. My voice came out rougher than I intended. I cleared my throat and stepped inside. The shop was clean. Cleaner than I had left it, if I was honest. The floor had been swept and the tool chests were aligned, and the bay where the Morrison transmission job had been was empty and wiped down the job log on the wall, updated in Tommy's careful block printing. The Mustang I had been working on before the stroke sat exactly where I had left it, a note taped to the windshield in Tommy's handwriting, "Waiting for you, boss." My throat closed completely. I pressed 2 fingers against my eyes and held them there for 3 seconds. "Tommy," I said, "you're getting a raise." He made a sound that was half laugh, half something else entirely. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," I said. "That's what makes it mean something." He turned away to check something on the workbench that did not need checking, and I let him have that moment without comment. I had been back in the shop for 20 minutes when Ray called. "The grand jury returned the indictment at 9:15 this morning," he said, and his voice had the quality it carries when he is delivering something significant and wants to make sure every word lands correctly. "Gerald Lee Whitmore has been indicted on 3 federal counts: wire fraud, mortgage fraud, and witness tampering. Agent Reeves expects the U.S. Attorney will seek a sentence of 8 to 12 years, given the scope and the tampering charge." A pause. "His attorney is already in discussions about a plea to reduce the count. But the tampering charge makes that very difficult. You do not tamper with a federal witness and walk away clean." I set my hand flat on the workbench. The metal was cool under my palm, solid and real. "And Brandon?" I asked. "The cooperation agreement stands. Given the scope of his disclosure and the fact that his testimony directly enabled the tampering charge, the U.S. Attorney's Office is recommending a suspended sentence. 2 years probation, 2,000 hours of community service, full financial restitution on his portion of the fraudulent draws." Ray paused. "He keeps his freedom. He loses a great deal else, but he keeps his freedom." My eyes went hot. I pressed my lips together and breathed for a moment through my nose, slow and careful. "That's the right outcome," I said. My voice came out steady. I was glad of it. "There's one more thing," Ray said. "Judge Okafor issued the civil ruling on the TRO this morning as well. The fraudulent LLC filing has been invalidated. The mortgage on the shop property is void, the lender has been notified, and is cooperating with the federal investigation. The deed reverts fully to you free and clear." Another pause, and this one had a different quality, the pause of a man who has been holding something back and is now ready to set it down. "Walt, the shop is yours. All of it. Exactly as it was. Nothing was taken." I did not speak for a long moment. Outside the bay door, a car went by on the street. A dog barked somewhere down the block. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary Sunday in Memphis, Tennessee, continuing without ceremony. "Ray," I said, and my voice broke on his name just slightly, just at the edge, just enough. "Thank you for 40 years of this." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost its professional evenness entirely. "It was an honor, Walt. Every single year of it." I ended the call. Stood at my workbench with my hand still flat on the cool metal surface, and let myself feel it, all of it, the full weight of the week, the stroke and the hospital and Brandon's confession, and Gerald's indictment, and the deed coming back to me clean. My eyes were wet. I did not try to stop them. I just stood there in my shop in the smell of motor oil and 45 years of work and cried quietly, without apology, the way old men cry when no one is watching, and the thing they feared most did not happen. Tommy appeared in the doorway of the back office. He looked at me. His own eyes went red immediately. He crossed the floor and put his hand on my shoulder and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say, and sometimes a hand on a shoulder is the most complete sentence in the world. We stood there like that for a while, the two of us in the shop that was still mine. Then I wiped my face with the back of my hand, took a long breath, and looked at the Mustang with the note on the windshield. "Pull me a socket set," I said. 3/8 drive. Tommy's whole face broke into a grin, wide and real and full of relief. "Yes, sir," he said, and he was already moving before the words were out. I put on my work gloves, walked to the Mustang, and got back to work. January in Memphis comes in cold and clear. The kind of cold that does not apologize for itself, that strips the trees bare and turns the sky a hard, clean blue, that makes everything look sharper than it actually is. On the second Saturday of that January 6.5 months after I woke up in a hospital bed, not knowing how much of myself I had lost, I stood at the front of a room I had built with my own hands, looked out at 14 young faces, and said the thing I had been carrying since the week my son sat in a hospital chair and told me he had wanted to make me proud. "My name is Walter Calloway," I said. "I have been fixing engines for 55 years, and the most important thing I ever learned, the thing no one taught me, the thing I had to figure out the hard way, is that the work itself is the point, not what the work earns you, not what it lets you buy or where it lets you go. The work, the thing you make with your hands that was not there before you started." The room was quiet in the way rooms get when people are actually listening. Brandon was in the back row, not as a student. He was there because 3 months ago, when he had walked through the bay door of Callaway Auto Repair, for the first time since the hospital, I had handed him a broom and told him to start with the East Bay. His jaw had been tight, his eyes bright with something he was working very hard to keep contained. He had swept that bay cleaner than it had been in years. He had been here every single day since. Ray stood near the back wall in his good coat, arms folded, wearing the expression he carries when something has gone the way he hoped, but he is too careful to say so out loud. Dot sat in the second row, yellow legal pad, open pen, already moving. 6 weeks ago, when I called and asked if she would come back as the Foundation's financial director, she had gone so quiet I thought the line had dropped. Then her voice had come through, thick and completely undone. "Walt, you would trust me with that," and I had said, "I already do." She had broken down then, not the quiet kind, but the full, heaving kind that comes when relief is too large for a person's body to hold, and I had let her cry because she had earned every second of it. Tommy stood beside me at the front marker in hand whiteboard, behind him, ready to take the class through basic diagnostics. He had spent 2 weeks preparing. Watching him stand there, 24 years old and collected and ready, something in my chest went so full it almost hurt. Agent Reeves had called the previous Thursday. Gerald Whitmore, 9 years, federal facility in Nashville, full asset forfeiture. Meridian Development had withdrawn from Memphis entirely. Cassie had cooperated, received a deferred prosecution agreement, and was living with Patricia, starting over. Starting over was more than some people got. Brandon's probation ran 2 years. His restitution came out of his salary, a salary I set fair, a salary he never argued about once. One evening in November, after everyone else had gone home, he had stood beside me at the workbench while I finished a brake job and said quietly, without looking at me, "I know sorry isn't enough, but I need you to know I understand what I almost took from you. Not just the shop. You. I almost let them take you." I had kept my hands on the brake assembly. My eyes had gone hot. Then I said, "I know you do, that's why you're still here." He had nodded, picked up a wrench, and gotten back to work. Now I looked out at 14 young faces, at my son in the back row, at Tommy, at the whiteboard, at Ray and Dot, and everyone who had chosen to show up. And I thought about Margaret, my wife gone 11 years, who always said the shop was not just a business, but a place where people learned what they were capable of. She had been right. She was almost always right. All right. I said, my voice steady and warm and completely my own. Let's get to work. Tommy uncapped the marker. The class leaned forward, and outside on Summer Avenue, Memphis went about its January morning, cold and clear, and continuing, as cities do, without ceremony, without pause, without looking back. They say God doesn't give you more than you can carry. I used to think that was something people said to make hard things sound smaller. But sitting here now on the other side of the worst week of my 70 years, I believe it. Every door that closed, every betrayal that surfaced, every document that came back with my name forged on it, none of it broke me. Maybe that was grace. Maybe I was just too stubborn to fall. Probably both. Here is what I know. After all of it, I loved my son so much that I stopped seeing him clearly. I gave without asking questions. I trusted without verifying. And I almost lost everything because of it. Not because love is wrong, but because love without clear eyes is just permission dressed up in good intentions. So let me say this plainly, from one imperfect person to another. Don't do what I did. Don't wait for a stroke to start paying attention to the people closest to you. Don't confuse generosity with wisdom. Know what you own, know who has access to it, and know the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves what you have built. This is my personal belief: a man's legacy is not his property. It is the standard he holds when everything is on the line. These are grandpa stories nobody plans to live through. But they happen in real family story, after real family story, in real homes, to real people who worked too hard and trusted too easily. These grandpa stories are more common than any of us want to admit. If any part of this moved you, if it made you think of someone you love, leave a word in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this one, you know what to do. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than I can say. And one last thing, the stories ahead contain fictional elements constructed purely for reflection and life lessons. If that is not the content you are looking for, no hard feelings, step away and find what serves you better. But if you are staying, I will see you in the next one.